So what are interseasonal atmospheric oscillation? In this example, I want to show you how these physical biological physics are relevant to relatively short timescale. So these are oscillations with a timescale of a few tens of days. You can see them in all sorts of atmospheric variables. You can see them in atmospheric convection, huge clouds, few kilometers high, mainly in the Western Pacific, and a lot of rainfall, and you can see them also in the surface wind. They have some propagating and some stemming characteristics. So if you look on surface wind, you can see actually the signal sometimes circling the whole Earth. But if you look on atmospheric convection, this is mainly limited to the Western Pacific. They affect the extratropics, the Nino, the monsoon, so they have a global importance, although the main activity is in the Western Pacific. There are many theories for these interseasonal atmospheric oscillations. Actually, there are more theories than theoreticians that work on these phenomena. Some of the theories have more than one explanation for this oscillation. At the beginning, it was assumed that this is only due to internal atmospheric dynamics, all sorts of feedbacks between the atmosphere, but more recently, people noticed that there are also some oscillation in sea surface temperature, and it might be actually air-sea coupled phenomena. And what I will show you that one possibility is that there are actually changes in the marine ecological system might cause changes in sea surface temperature on the right timescale, and under certain conditions, these might stimulate interseasonal oscillation in the atmosphere. So first looks on the marine ecological system. In general, if you take a predator-prey system, you can get oscillation. The most famous, the earliest model is the Lotka-Volterra model. If you have if you don't have much predator around, the blue line is the predator and the red line is the prey. If you don't have if you have a lot of predator, the amount of prey may decline because they are eaten by, say, the zooplankton. But once you don't have prey around, the predator have nothing to eat, so they die. Without predator around, the prey can survive, and under a certain condition, can get predator-prey oscillation. Actually, even this first model, it was invented to explain fish catches in the Adriatic Sea for some marine applications. If you look on time experiment, so these are between phytoplankton and zooplankton. You can see the blue and the green line. The time scale here is in days. You can see that this predator-prey oscillation between phytoplankton and zooplankton are the order of a few tens of days. If you look on lakes, this study compiled information for tens of lakes in all continents, different latitudes in all of them again. So it's in days, the time scale are few tens of days. Here are some observations from a marine station in India. Here the time scale are in months, and you can see that after the bloom starts, it starts to get some oscillation on the time scales of, again, a few weeks. So what we try to take is, again, a very simple model, zero-dimensional model, which include the marine ecological system, a very simple, what we call NPZ model. So we have one nutrient, we have phytoplankton, and we have zooplankton. A simple atmospheric model, which takes into account marine atmospheric convection, and a simple thermodynamical ocean model of the mixed layer only. I will not get too much into the equation. You can see I'll just show you the main coupling between the different components. So this is the NPZ model. So you can see that the phytoplankton grow by taking a nutrient. They have some mortality rate, and we have grazing by the zooplankton. The zooplankton grow by eating the phytoplankton, and they are grazed by higher trophic levels. And this is the equation for the nutrients. So each of these terms affect the amount of available nutrient, and also some mixing of nutrient with the deep ocean if the layer below. We have some equation for the atmosphere, so the amount of, this is, after some manipulation, the temperature equation for the atmosphere, and we can see that we have a convergence or divergence in the atmosphere depends on the amount of radiation, and the amount of radiation depends on the amount of cloud, with some parameter area. And this is the equation for the ocean model. You just change the temperature of the mixed layer if you change the amount of radiation which is absorbed in the ocean. The amount of radiation absorbed by the ocean depends on how much radiation actually get to the ocean surface. So this is affected by the amount of cloud, because cloud reflect part of the radiation back to space. And it's also, as I mentioned, half of the radiation will be absorbed anyway, but the rest will be absorbed by the amount of phytoplankton. So you can see the P here is the same P that we have in the equation for the phytoplankton. And the same R here is the R that we have in this atmospheric model. There are very large uncertainties in this parameter R. So you can try to run the model, do some sensitivity experiments, see how the result will change as function of this R. If you just take R to be 0.2, if you don't take the effect of biota on light penetration, the model just enters, of course, a steady state. If you do take it into account, you can see that you get a very tiny variation in the amount of precipitation, tiny variation in sea surface temperature. You have some oscillation in the phytoplankton, in the zooplankton. But nothing really that resembles what we call interseasonal oscillation. If you increase this R to be 0.25, and still you neglect the effect of biota on the light penetration, the model still enters steady state. But now, when you do take the effect of phytoplankton on light penetration, you can see a very large oscillation in atmospheric convection. So you can see that we have few days of a lot of precipitation, then we have few days with clear sky, then another few days with convection, and so on. You can see that although the direct effect of the phytoplankton on the sea surface temperature is only a few tenths of a degree, actually it stimulates a very large feedback, because now once we have these huge clouds, it reduced a lot the amount of radiation to reach the Earth's surface. So now the changes in sea surface temperature are much larger than the direct effect that you would expect just from the phytoplankton on the light. If you will increase even further this R, still within the acceptable range, you will get oscillation now even without the biota. But now the time scale of this oscillation is much longer than what we call interseasonal oscillation. It's over 150 years. And the role of the biota in this regime of parameters is actually to make the time scale much shorter. So if to summarize this part, we can see some different explanation for this interseasonal oscillation, and the ocean biota played a significant role in this oscillation. This tiny variation in the SST, which are directly affected by the marine ecological system, might stimulate atmospheric convection if the atmosphere is pretty close to some instability point. I didn't go into the mechanistic details of this mechanism. And of course, we neglected a lot of other processes, so this was, again, a sort of a toy model. But again, demonstrate some potential feedbacks between the biota and climate on a relatively short time scale. So now I want to move to a completely different spatial and temporal scale, what we call the glacial interglacial cycles. So this is the Earth as it looks today. This is a view from above the North Pole. So today we have ice sheets only over Greenland. If you look on the last ice age, only about 18,000 years ago, we can see that all North America, Canada, a significant part of Europe were covered by ice. These ice sheets got with thickness of a few kilometers at a certain point. There was so much ice over land at that time that sea level was about 100 meters lower than it is today. records from ice cores, so if you look at the second graphs, we can see that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changed during these cycles by 30%. So it changed between about 200 ppm to about 300 ppm. Today, I think we are at around 380, so we are now much higher than that. But even during these last 10 million years, during these glacial interglacial cycles, carbon dioxide changed by 30% naturally. And there are some specific questions related to these changes in carbon dioxide. One of them, what is the mechanism? What caused these glacial interglacial CO2 changes? And perhaps the more interesting question is what is the role of these CO2 changes in these glacial cycles? Are they driving these glacial cycles, or they are just a byproduct of the cycles? It's really not clear. There are many hypotheses that try to explain these changes in CO2. We'll just do a crash course on the marine carbon cycle. So if you look at how much carbon we have in the ocean, in the atmosphere together, 98% is in the ocean. Which means that in the long run, the ocean will actually dictate how much carbon will be in the atmosphere. If you look within the ocean, how this carbon is distributed between the upper ocean and the deep ocean, this is related to what we call the solubility pump. The solubility pump means that how the effect of the ocean temperature and salinity affect the solubility of carbon dioxide. We have the soft tissue pump. If we increase primary production in the ocean, we will, to build organic tissues, we will take carbon from the ocean. Then when these plankton die, part of them sink to the deep ocean. So we have a way to export carbon from the upper ocean to the deep ocean. And some species also take carbon to build this, the hard shell, the calcium carbonate shell. This actually tends to increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but I will not go into the details. But overall, we can see that biological activity in the ocean affect the distribution of carbon between the upper ocean and the deep ocean. There were two proposed mechanisms to explain this glacial interglacial CO2 variations. One of them by Robbie Togweiler suggested that if you reduce the vertical mixing in the Southern Ocean, you will reduce the amount of carbon-rich water that upwell and get in contact with the atmosphere, and this is one way to reduce atmospheric CO2. Then there was another mechanism by Stephens and Killing that suggested that during the ice ages, we had an extended sea ice cover in the Southern Ocean, and this also acted as a sort of a lid to prevent air-sea carbon fluxes, and this was another mechanism to reduce atmospheric CO2. Both of them sort of build some models in which they specify ocean circulation or specify the amount of sea ice in the Southern Ocean in somewhat arbitrary way. What I will show you is a model that reproduces the glacial interglacial cycles, and as a byproduct also reduce vertical mixing in the Southern Ocean and increase sea ice cover them. This one. So again, we work with a relatively simple model. So this is the Earth as it was really meant to be. It is built of few boxes. So the whole atmosphere is represented by 3 boxes. One of them covers the area between 45 degrees south and 45 degrees north. And then there are 2 polar boxes. The ocean is also divided into 6 boxes, 3 surface ones, corresponding to the same latitude of the atmospheric one, and 3 deep boxes. There is a sub-model for sea ice and land ice, some representation of the meridional overturning circulation. At the second stage, we also put into this model a very simple biochemical component. The only external forcing for this model is the solar radiation. So first I will show you that this model is able to reproduce the glacial interglacial cycles of the physical climate system without changes in CO2. And the mechanism